We grade the Bucks off season from a year ago. What did they learn? What carries over into this season? And no surprise, who the most impactful addition was. Camille and I dig into the details coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network, joined as always by Camille Davis. You can find her work on the Locked On NBA podcast and the Technical Foul podcast as well. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, and to all the everydayers out there, up there active in the comments in the live stream and on the YouTube chat as well. Camille, I mentioned this one. We're going to take a look back at last summer, and I mean, there's no real way of saying, hey, who was the most impactful free agent, because it's pretty clear who it was. But the overall takeaway from free agency from a year ago, and the fact that the Bucks theoretically are no longer shopping in the bargain bins this summer, but what you got from last year. So I mentioned it's a no-brainer who was the most impactful ad that the Bucks had a year ago. That is clearly Gary Trent Jr. And I mean, to say we were extremely hyped to get Gary Trent Jr. on board would be an understatement a year ago. And this was a guy that I think certainly we brought it up. A lot of Bucks fans said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could get Gary Trent Jr.? And I know at the time free agency started, I think just about all of us said, yeah, it'd be great, but 0% chance that's happening. And then slowly but surely there was no home and no market for him. And you started to hear, well, Damian Lillard's really recruiting him. And you started to do that dangerous thing of allowing yourself that possibility to think, well, maybe he will sign here. And that's what happened. And you look back at last year for Gary Trent, and there's no way of classifying it other than a pretty big success for the Bucks. I think for Gary Trent Jr., he could probably look at it and say there was still some meat on the bone there, where he just started 9 games, and a product of that was the team got off to a slow start, and they felt like that was the change that was necessary. But I think the big thing to take from this is he essentially replaced Malik Beasley, and you saw, is he the shooter that Beasley is? No, but he's a much better, more capable defender, and he can give you some offensive creation. I think it's pretty clear he's probably, I know we did this a couple shows ago. I mean, in a vacuum, you would say he's priority number 1. I think the injury to Damian Lillard at least makes it interesting with a guy like Kevin Porter Jr., but the fact that he's 26 years old, he is a two-way player. He had a pretty big impact in the playoffs. And then you look at it and you say, well, he started 9 games. I mean, this is our starting 2 guard if he comes back next season. So, I mean, if we're going to assign grades, it's at least an A for me for Gary Trent Jr. a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when we actually signed Gary Trent Jr., we were like, that signing actually bumped up our overall perception and grade of how Bucks free agency went last year. Thinking like, okay, we have a guy who's going to immediately become the starting 2 guard. And to your point about how it just didn't work out, I give Gary Trent Jr. a lot of credit as well for just accepting the role that was given to him. Like, hey, we need you at this moment after this slow start. Be the guy off the bench. And to his credit too, he was dealing with the back injury to start the season, which could have been part of the reason why he got off to a little bit of a slower start. Like early returns there, I know there are people going like, I didn't necessarily expect this from Gary Trent Jr., but as the season went on and he got more comfortable, got a bit healthier, you saw the impact that he was able to make. And I think the difference between him and Beasley, that defense aspect of it is key. And I think that's something for the Bucks looking to this summer that they have to keep in mind as well, of like, we got to have guys who can play some defense, who can at least hold their own out there on the court. And Gary Trent Jr. was somebody who could have really active hands. He could come in and really like change the energy up, in addition to him being someone who can go create his own shot. And we saw it in the playoffs, how badly that was needed. And honestly too, once the roster composition changed at the deadline, with getting rid of Chris Middleton and everything you expect from him, the Bucks needed some other guys who could go and get their own bucket. And Gary Trent Jr. was one of those guys. He shot like 41, 42% from 3 this year, on a decent volume, like 6 threes a game. Just an overall success of a season for Gary Trent Jr. in Milwaukee, to the point where I do wonder, we kind of have talked about a little bit, but I do wonder what the season has done for his market, because he signed a vet min last season. This offseason, don't see him signing for that. We talked about maybe getting the Malik Beasley deal where it's, $6-7 million a year, but we're going to have to see how that shakes out based on what he did. And also the playoff performance of him just getting crazy hot for the one win that the Bucks did get against the Pacers.
So it's interesting because just to catch anyone up on that last piece that you mentioned. So Gary Trent Jr. got to Milwaukee because he had a pretty sizable contract prior to that. I think it was around $18 million a year that he was making, and the Raptors were only willing to go to that 15 million-ish per year range. Gary Trent's representation turned that down, and the Raptors pulled the offer. And then you saw, just as we've talked about with this offseason, and I don't think this part is going to change in the near future, there aren't very many teams with cap space and with money to spend. So you're basically looking at, can you get either a veteran minimum, a taxpayer mid-level? If your agency turned down that 15 million, right around the non-taxpayer mid-level, you're thinking more. I just don't see the market with teams that have that. And we saw that's what led to him taking the veteran minimum. I think, as you pointed out, the Malik Beasley comp is probably apropos when you look at, okay, you're certainly not a $3 million per year player, but I don't think there's an appetite for $15 million for Gary Trent Jr. across the league with that player type. So I do think it's going to fall somewhere in that $5 to $8 million range, $7 million, somewhere around there. The teams that have the non-taxpayer are going to break that up and use that to offer to Gary Trent Jr. if it's a team that needs a two guard. But I know he's represented by Clutch, and I think the comp that they were making in his free agency a year ago was to Malik Monk. And when you look at just the surface level numbers, it's a very interesting comp. I mean, Malik Monk being a super sub and winning the sixth man of the year, or what was it? Finished fifth or
I think it's second, or yeah.
Yeah. A couple of years in a row. That kind of drove up his value, but by the numbers, they're very comparable. Gary Trent Jr. is a career 39% three-point shooter. I think they've each played the same amount of years in the league too. Malik Monk's a 35%, which does not match, what you would think comes with Malik Monk. The scoring averages, Gary Trent Jr. has averaged more points throughout his career than Malik Monk has. He's played in 415 games as Gary Trent. Malik Monk in one more year has played 523 games. So up and down the board here, pretty comparable between those two. And I do wonder if this was a landscape where more teams had money to spend and it wasn't just the 5 or so teams that had cap space and a handful that had that non-taxpayer mid-level. Is Gary Trent Jr. looking at somewhere around 20 million? Because Malik Monk's in the 18 to $20 million range.
Yeah, I think Malik, I think he was signed like a 4-year, almost $80 million contract initially with the Kings. So yeah, that feels like an interesting comp, and I could see that being something like that's what I was aiming for. But to your point about the conversations that happened initially with Toronto of him looking for that 20 million or a little bit more than that, I do wonder what his appetite is this offseason, because again, a big pay cut, and we've talked about once you take a vet min, what does that do to your overall value around the league? And the goal for Gary Trent Jr. was to have a great year, be able to improve his value, cash in this summer, make a bit more money. So I do wonder, as your point of like, what are the priorities for him? Because I do think if he does come back to the Bucks, Gary Trent Jr. has to be your starting shooting guard. We have a comment here from Io just mentioning the fact of I'm not sure how great of a starter he can be for 82 games, but he's a good 20-minute per game guy. And I could definitely see the questioning behind that. But to me, his effort in the playoffs gave me a lot more confidence about what he could do as a starting shooting guard with a bigger responsibility, with a higher minute load. Because in this playoffs, again, a small sample size because Bucks got bounced in the first round, 5 games. He started 3 of them, averaged about 34 minutes a game, gave the Bucks 18, 19 points. I mean, he shot the leather off the ball, shooting 50% from three on like 8, almost 9 attempts a game. So he is somebody whose playoff performance has made me even more comfortable with the idea of him being a starting shooting guard going forward.
Yeah, you brought up the interesting point about what's next for players that go from the vet minimum contract, and a couple of interesting comments to get to as well. We'll do that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you about our friends over at DoorDash. All NBA fans know what time it is. Playoff season brings big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more, use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Maybe you're looking for a go-to move after an epic game, or you're ordering wings and reliving those highlights. Imagine being rewarded with free food just because somebody went off and dropped 50 points. If you've ever looked at your delivery fees and thought there has to be a better way, well, there is. With Dash Pass, you get $0 delivery fees and exclusive perks like this one. Imagine how much more you could save over the course of a season. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, Camille. So just to clear up a couple of things, too. Malik Monk is making just under $19 million this next season. Season after that, he is at $20 million, and then he has a player option for just under $22 million the year after that. I'm going to go ahead and pencil him in for picking up that player option. But the notion of, and there was one other ask of Gary Trent Jr. suitors about teams like the Magic. That is an interesting one to keep an eye on with how much they need shooting. Phoenix Suns were brought up as well. Phoenix can't do anything. They are deep into the second apron. So they're with that list of teams like the Cavs, like the Celtics, who look at, we got to shed money because we can't really do anything other than vet minimums or pay to retain our guys. But I think we talked about this, you, me, and Frank, at the time of the signing for Gary Trent Jr. last year, and that you take a veteran minimum, and it's interesting because it's not that you can't recover and make more money. It's not that you're stuck on a vet minimum go forward. But the general notion is, look, once you accept that, you're never getting back to the mid-level contract range. That teams are either going to say, you're a vet minimum guy, go forward, or we give you the 120% raise, or we'll do like a Malik Beasley type of thing where we'll double your salary and we'll break up part of that mid-level exception. And I think you hope that remains the case, especially in this landscape, because that would benefit the Bucks greatly to say, we got this guy. He's 26 years old. This is a piece we compare, and we saw how well it fits alongside Giannis on both ends of the floor. And we have him at a pretty controllable contract figure, because that is the more important learning that we've had when you talk about what types of players do you need to bring in, what style do you need to play. The bigger thing is you can't saddle yourself with massive contracts, with multiple max contracts.
Yeah, it's nice to have a variety of different types of contracts that could be tradable along the way if need be. And I think for Gary Trent Jr. too, I think his age plays an interesting part in the conversations around his upcoming salary, because it could be a situation, as mentioned, where this offseason he doubles, maybe up to 10 million, whatever that case might be for him this year. But maybe he takes a shorter deal again of like, okay, I'm going to kind of bet on myself another time here. Like, I'm going to increase this value one more again this season, because he is only 26 years old. So it's not as if he's a vet that's aging. So you're thinking like, okay, well, he's no longer going to be able to even get close to another big contract. For Gary Trent Jr., I think it's a situation of, listen, I understood what had to happen last year, and we're all still adjusting to what this new CBA is going to be doing for the middle market of NBA contracts. So let me just kind of see what the market is this year. And then if it's not as high as I want it to be, let me bet on myself one more time, because I feel like I'm young enough to be able to go out here and increase my value again this upcoming season.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next player that the Bucks brought in through free agency a year ago, Taurean Prince, who was another veteran minimum addition that you had. And I mean, you certainly saw the warts throughout the course of the season and in the postseason. And I know there was a lot of Lakers fans that were very, very quick to jump into the chat and let us know, don't get too excited. You'll be disappointed here. But I think we went in with our eyes wide open to the experience, Camille. I don't anticipate, I won't speak for you. I don't anticipate Taurean Prince will be back next season. If he is, and it's a veteran minimum and 120% raise, I would be fine with that. I think that's where Taurean Prince is kind of locked in go forward. When we talk about, you can go one of two ways. You can start to bump up where you're taking part of that mid-level exception, or you just remain a vet minimum guy on a new team every couple of years where you're just getting that 120% raise. I think the latter is what we've seen with Taurean Prince. I said I wouldn't mind him back on another vet minimum type deal, because I do think he's valuable regular season depth, and he gives you another body that you can break in case of emergency in the postseason. And as we've seen, regular season depth is important. So
Yes.
There definitely will be a home if it's not in Milwaukee. There will be suitors for Taurean Prince, but how would you classify his season with the Bucks last season? A success or failure?
I think overall, a success, but probably closer to like that, not just passing, but maybe like C plus B minus type of range here. But I think part of it was, I think he was played out of position for a lot of the year.
Yes.
I said it early on, like Taurean Prince is not a shooting guard.
Especially after the trade deadline. Yeah.
Right. And I understand what the Bucks were trying to do with like just to have the size advantage of like, hey, we're going to be a big team, a jumbo team. We are just going to try to smother teams in that way. But I think he was put in a very difficult situation this past season of go ahead and guard guards. Like Taurean Prince is a small forward who can guard up a little bit here. But I think that's part of why the grade's a little bit lower for me. He was just kind of played out of position towards the end of the year. But I do think he's a great depth piece, like you mentioned. I mean, we look at the Pacers, a team that has prided on their depth to get them to the playoffs healthy, of like, hey, we're going to make sure we're able to play our guys a smaller amount of minutes than normal so that when they get to the playoffs, they're going to be healthy. So to your point about how important that is, I could not agree more. And thinking about how this team can be built for the 2025-26 season, like you guys on vet men's like a Taurean Prince can be very, very, very helpful, but you got to put him in the best position to succeed. And in addition to that, like he was on fire as a catch and shoot guy. I felt like the Bucks could have did a better job of getting him more of those looks. He was asked to put the ball on the ground a lot and do a lot more offensively than I would have tasked him with. But overall, especially for a guy who was getting paid the vet men, I think it was a success here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, and it was in many ways a career year for Gary Trent Jr. He played the most minutes that he had since his third season in the league with the Taurean Prince. Sorry, yeah. Since his third season in the league with the Hawks, his rebounding numbers best since the year the Bucks won the title, and the efficiency numbers. I mean, he shot the crap out of the ball. He was a 44% three-point shooter, 60% effective field goal percentage, was 81% at the free throw line. Granted, he didn't get there too often, but he said this from day one at media day when he said, I've reviewed all the film. I looked at catch and shoot opportunities, where players position themselves when they're on the floor with Giannis, and he took control of it, or he took advantage of that. So yeah, I think he's valuable depth, and I would not scoff at bringing him back for a pretty similar contract figure there, just to give you another usable body. And as you mentioned too, to say, okay, you're not a two guard. Gary Trent Jr., assuming we retain him, he is our starting two guard. AJ Green, maybe you start him at the 3 But AJ Green comes in and plays there. Taurean Prince to me is a bench guy that gives you valuable depth, and he's a great corner three shooter. So I do think there's going to be a market for him. I would still classify it as a success because of those efficiency numbers and the depth that he gave you. And again, if we're comping this to who he replaced, it was essentially replacing Jay Crowder. You'll make that move 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, that was definitely an upgrade for him too. I see a comment that came in too from Alex just saying like Taurean Prince is not a playoff shooter because he's a little bit too hesitant to pull the trigger in high leverage situations. And I would agree with that. Like you could see him thinking it through sometimes with the quick closeouts. But again, too, the playoffs were a little weird just based on like the minute load that he had. Like in the regular season for the Milwaukee Bucks this past year, he played 27 minutes a game, which one could argue was a little bit too many minutes for Taurean Prince. And then come playoff time, it dropped down to about 12 on average because of the lineup changes as the series went on. And he wasn't able to get up as many shots during his time on the court. It did not translate as well to the playoffs, which is why I think that, to your point, he's not the starter if he would come back for the Bucks. But again, a guy who you can count on as additional depth and somebody who, I mean, we can talk about this, but we didn't see as much of the small ball. Giannis had 5 lineups and maybe Taurean Prince could slide in at the 4 next to him type of situation. So I think that there is still levels that they could try to reach with Taurean Prince if he did come back to Milwaukee.
Yeah, and there's one more thought on not just Taurean Prince, but this entire group. And there's one name left to get to. So we'll have that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. You know, I think one of the other things to point out in the case for retaining Taurean Prince and saying this is valuable depth, let's bring him back, as you know what you're getting in the regular season, you know, in the postseason, those numbers probably around 10 minutes a game, and you got to find the right situation for him. But I do also think there is something to be said for, you know, Gary Trent Jr. You want to retain for the obvious reasons. Kevin Porter Jr. you would like to retain, and Ryan Rollins you'd like to retain for the obvious reasons. One other name we're about to get to, you'd love to retain for the obvious reason. Taurean Prince, you'd love to retain because, as we just went through, he is very valuable depth. But also, I don't think you want to, if we're assuming Giannis is still here, you don't want to get into the habit of completely reshaping your team every single year. That at some point, you do need some consistency to set in. And look, I get you need better players for that consistency, but you still need something you can lean on, where these guys, there's not that learning curve. And they know Taurean Prince, for example, I know where to position myself to get the ball from Giannis. I know what to give him defensively and how to play off of guys. That building that thing up and keeping some of that chemistry and continuity is important. And as we talked about, the finances, the type of players that you need to find and lean into to be successful in this iteration of the league, I think consistency and continuity is a big piece of that as well.
I think that's an excellent point because as we saw, like there's always a learning curve. You know, one of my favorite things to say is like the NBA is not NBA 2K. You can't just make trades or bring guys on board and expect it to all click immediately. Sometimes it does. Sometimes things do happen that quickly, but more time than not, like you're going to need to get those reps in. You're going to have to build the chemistry. So if you can have a core group of role guys that continue to grow with your superstar, it can be beneficial. I mean, when you think about the Bucks championship core and some of the role players who have come and gone, and then who has stayed, and the growth in the game with them and Giannis, like it's crazy to see, like with Pat Connaughton, someone who fell out the rotation this year. But I mean, prior to that, you saw the chemistry, the ability for them to get those inverted pick and rolls off. Like Pat was one of the best guys on the team to run that with Giannis. You see the Bobby Portis chemistry, which is still developing. Like this past season might have been the best between Giannis and Bobby Portis together on the court this season. And it's been 4 or 5 years of Bobby Portis in Milwaukee to continue to get to that point. Brook Lopez, knowing where he's going to be, trusting in that. So I think your point about having some consistency with some guys who are going to be in your rotation is a good one, a really, really good one.
Yeah, and it's not a free agency class on the wing there at small forward-ish position that really blows you away. I mean, Josh Giddey is a free agent. Dorian Finney-Smith has a player option. Kelly Oubre and Chris Middleton have player options. So does everybody's favorite Matisse Thybulle. And then you got players like Taurean Prince and Zaire Williams slotting in there. I think there's some interesting names if the Bucks want to go bargain hunting again, like a Caleb Houston or Justin Edwards, and what happens with those two guys. Delano Banton's another guy I've always been very high on. So maybe that's one of the things you look to say. And look, if we can keep the other guys, we'll just keep this part ever evolving. And we don't have a home for Taurean Prince. We're offering a veteran minimum to someone else there. But it leaves us with one other name, and that is Delon Wright, who is all of a sudden making an impact in the playoffs for the New York Knicks. But he's a fringe level rotational player at this point in his career at best. And we certainly did not see the best of him in Milwaukee a season ago, not to the level expectations that we had, certainly. And even Doc Rivers saying, look, this was our number one guy going into the offseason. I do think a big part of that was you didn't think Gary Trent Jr. was attainable, given there's got to be more money out there for him. But Delon Wright was more of a realistic option. The Bucks got him immediately, and we immediately assumed, wow, this is a great combo guard to have. He's going to boost your defense. You saw spurts of that defense, but we just slowly saw him fall out of favor in the rotation and become non-existent. So in terms of assigning a grade to him or rating his performance, it's an incomplete. There's really nothing to give him except for he landed you Jericho Sims. And if you are able to retain Jericho Sims now and keep him around, that Delon Wright signing is all of a sudden very impactful. If you can work something out where you get a 2+1 or something with Jericho Sims and you turned a veteran minimum, 33-year-old point guard into a young, nice defensive mobile piece at the center position, when we've said for years, what does life after Brook Lopez look like?
Yeah, to turn Delon Wright, somebody who fell out of the rotation for the Bucks, into Jericho Sims, who was somebody who started to find himself in the Bucks rotation. He had the injury that kind of hampered that down the stretch of the regular season, but he is somebody who got playoff minutes, and you saw the value that Jericho Sims can bring to you with his defensive versatility. Like, if the Bucks do retain Jericho Sims, I agree wholeheartedly that Delon Wright signing looks a lot better in retrospect because you were able to do something with it. And that's one of the things I always give John Horst some credit for. Like, every single move that he makes is not successful, but he is somebody who can look at something and say, this is not working. I need to try to flip this into something else. And he generally does do that. And getting Jericho Sims in for that, a big positive for this team. And Jericho Sims is somebody who this offseason, I think the Bucks should really look to try to bring back, just because, I mean, we know the offense isn't quite there for Jericho Sims, but what he can give you defensively, versatility wise, being able to switch everything, again, throwing different looks. And the playoffs, again, showed this message is still the same of you got to be able to do different things depending on your matchup. And Jericho Sims is the type of piece that if you have, it can really boost you going forward. So yeah, I think, and I don't think a Jericho Sims contract this offseason will be extremely expensive. We have a comment coming in mentioning Sims could be around a vet min, but he is already 26. But I think it's gonna be a little bit higher than the vet min for Jericho Sims, but I don't think it's going to be outlandish to try to retain him.
No, I don't think it's going to be a mid-level exception range. I mean, maybe it's the taxpayer mid-level somewhere around there, but I think Brook Lopez is going to command twice as much at least as Jericho Sims, which again is a good thing for the Bucks. When we look at, okay, you have these players, you have the option to retain them, and there's not a whole lot of teams that have cap room, number one, and not every team has those things that we mentioned that the Bucks have. Well, you can use a biannual, you can use the non-taxpayer mid-level. So it's a much different situation that we're walking into here this offseason than it was a year ago for the Bucks. The big difference, though, is you felt pretty confident about two guys that were anchoring this team, and now, I mean, both of them, there's a lot of questions surrounding. You don't assume Damian Lillard is going to play next season. We still don't know what's going to happen with Giannis, and as we've said a number of times, the ability to retain all these guys that we mentioned, if you got Giannis, you got a really good chance where players are going to say, okay, I played with him last year. I want to play with this guy. if he's gone, that's when it becomes, I'm going to look over here. Oh, the Mavericks are offering me this. I can play with this guy. The Lakers are offering me this. That's when it starts to change things. So in many ways for the Bucks and the league as a whole, that is the number one domino that we have to wait for to fall to see where we go from here. That'll do it for today's show. We'll continue to take a look ahead to the NBA Finals, which we may be halfway there. Later on tonight, we may be fully there Thursday night when the Pacers have a chance to close out the New York Knicks and reach the NBA Finals. Be sure to check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And speaking of that, we got to wrap things up here, Camille, because you got a double secret mission that you're about to go on.
Yeah, I'm actually heading down to the Bucks practice facility to watch some draft workouts today. So I need to ask questions of how much I can discuss once I come back, because I would love to be able to talk about it on the pod, about who the Bucks brought in, what the experience was like. So we'll see. But if not, just know I'm watching.
Yeah, or I mean, since I do know that group, don't attach my name to this, but you could play the role of, just ask for forgiveness instead of ask for permission.
All right, Justin, you're supposed to say that off the air when they can't draw it back to you. See, now the plan is blown up.
Well, we'll see what we can report back on, and who knows, maybe there's a first round pick for the Bucks to have to start to dig into here this summer. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.